My name is Jay Rigle, and I was an E6, which enlisted man, which would third-class petty officer. Just before Christmas, they reassigned me and they sent me down to Treasure Island, which is in California, to be reassigned. So I ended up being assigned to a destroyer. The destroyer I was on was the Ernest G. Small, and the number was 838. That was in Sasebo, Japan. In those days, they didn't have any jets that got you to Japan. We flew what they called MATS, was military air transport. They had these 4-engine planes. I don't know if they had been bombers, and they converted them to passenger, and all they were was just a bunch of metal seats. And we had to stop 3 times before we could get to Yokosuka because for fuel. Stopped in Hawaii to get fuel, and stopped at Lake Island to get fuel, and we stopped at Guam to get fuel. And probably the most interesting part of my Navy career was after I got to the destroyer that was in Japan. And that ship was in dry dock also. They were working on it. It was a World War II destroyer, and there was some bottom plates that need to be replaced and stuff. And there was a huge naval, or it was actually a civilian shipyard in Sasebo, Japan. I'm sure it's still there. Merchant ships came there, Navy ships. So we were there for a couple of months, and us as sailors didn't have much to do because all the work was being done by civilians. What was after that was my most interesting part of my career in the Navy. They told us we were going on a secret mission, but they wouldn't tell us where. And after they got the ship ready and back in the water, a classified mission, I think they would call that. The first underwater atom bomb test was in Eniwetok. Well, it would have been in the early spring of 1955. And that's where we were going. And we went down there, and I don't know exactly. Eniwetok is way down in the South Pacific. And so they didn't tell us anything until we got there. And what they did was they exploded an atomic bomb in the ocean a mile deep. And the ships were they had them in circumference, of course, at mile interviews, but there weren't, they were old World War II ships. Nobody was on them, but they had a lot of test equipment. And then at another mile, they had some others at the radius, and they had some animals, which probably wouldn't be politically correct these days if anybody knew. And we were at 10 miles from the ground zero of this bomb. And we were in the first circumference where there are actually personnel on a ship. And so it came to the day, and they told us when it was going to happen, and we all had to get a general quarters and all our gear and stuff on. And they detonated the bomb, and we're all sitting on the deck waiting for whatever to happen. And nothing happened, you know. They said that they'd already detonated. Well, probably 3 or 4 minutes later, it felt like, now mind you, we're 10 miles away. It felt like somebody reached under the bottom of that destroyer and just lifted it up and let it back down again. Like you'd take a little boat and lift it up and drop it. Unbelievable stuff over, and there was all these old pipes and stuff. I remember this was World War stuff was falling down from above, you know, just to accumulate up there. And then, so we didn't get to see it except in pictures later. And even, now mind you, this bomb was 1 mile down in the ocean. And the mushroom and the water spout, which we saw in pictures later, was probably as tall as this building or maybe even more. It wasn't a nuclear, it was an atomic bomb, the same kind of bomb that they used in Nagasaki. I guess they just wanted to find out what it was like to blow up one under the water. And so then we spent several days cruising around there, picking up radioactive parts. There was stuff floating all over, you can imagine. Because some of the ships that were ground zero and even out at 3 miles, they were just, well, they weren't totally disintegrated, but if it didn't sink them, they were partly sunk, and there were pieces and stuff. And so that was the first time I'd ever seen anybody in all this gear, you know, that would be dealing with radioactivity. And what was that, a Geiger counter that they call it? And we'd reach over to the side with one of those, and if it started clicking, you know, then we were able, they picked it up and bagged it, and I can't remember exactly. They did something with it temporarily, and then as time went on, another ship came and got this stuff. And it's interesting that very few, in fact nobody that I've ever talked to since then ever heard of that bomb test. And so that must have been a pretty top secret, because that was, you know, that was it. And so we made our way back to Japan, and next thing I ended up in, we were there for a while, and I ended up back in Long Beach, which was the home port of that destroyer, and spent some time there. And so that was pretty much my career. You know, was rather uneventful, I guess, except for the test. And I do have a plaque or a paper that said that I was involved in that bomb test.